97% of Penrith sold on launch day at average price of over 2,800 PSF. Guys, this is simply incredible, man. It's like weekend after weekend, launches are being swept up like crazy. I think buyers are getting a little bit way too FOMO. It's like they're thinking, hey, if I don't buy this launch, then the next few launch I'm not going to miss out. I think this is not an exactly very healthy behavior, because in a way the buyer crowd, they subconsciously sabotage each other and push developers' profit margins to quite a high extent, I would say. Later we'll be looking at some of the key points like profit margin for developers, which I feel is quite a concern for Penrith, because the problem is that a lot of people, they look at the surroundings, the performance of those like Sterling, recent performance, that's why I say recent performance of Commonwealth Towers and also Queen's Peak, and then they base it that, hey, Penrith is going to make this amount of money in 4 years time, because now we cannot say 3 years, we have to look at 4 years due to the new SSD ruling. But in this video, I think we'll break down on some of the key points why I feel Penrith may not be as lucrative as most people think it is, or I would say how most agents will portray it to be. So let's take a look over here. Average price over here, I think above 2,800, which I presume will be around this range. Singaporeans accounted for over 90% of the buyers, remaining obviously these two groups. So I'm not going to be going too much into project details like floor plan and all, because after all, this is only like, I think at this point maybe now it's only left with 2% or lesser units. And if you are really looking seriously looking at these remaining units for Penrith, then I think in a way maybe this video may not really be for you, because if you are really still considering at 3,000 plus PSF, you can take it both ways. Either you think that, hey, this one is really too much of an emotional buy for you that you can't really be bothered about the numbers, or this video may serve to be a little bit of a caution for you. Anyway, back to this site plan over here. As you can see, Penrith looks, I would say, reminds me heavily of Midwood. If you guys don't really know, or you really been to Midwood, you will really know that the car park and then all the facilities are in between. It is like this because the piece of land is not very big, which is also another cause of concern, because if people compare to Sterling Residence is easily more than twice the size of Penrith's land plot, and that's why I would say it is not exactly a apple to apple comparison. In fact, it is more on the smaller side. Let's take a look at the location very quickly. There's a primary school right beside, so maybe some people may have a little bit of concern of noise, but up to individuals. But over here, you see, first one, we look at some of the competition. Margaret View, I would say, is quite a good comparison. Of course, the land size is quite a bit smaller, but I would say this one is this Penrith is closer in terms of land size to Margaret View than Sterling Residence, so you have to factor that in. Of course, the distance wise to MRT, this one is the furthest, but this one is not exactly as near as these two, because these two are just right in front. This one and this one is maybe about the same distance, but this one is maybe over here in terms of linear distance is slightly nearer. Let's not talk about Queens, of course. This one is also nearer. And if you look around this area, this is where all the black white bungalows and all the landed estate are, and that's why they're selling the unblocked view, right? But how long will this remain depends. Of course, if you are buying the top units, then I think the view will be there for a long time. But let's take a look further. Some of the key details, site area, as you can see, this is not even 10,000 square meters, so it's on the smaller side. Total number of car park lots is about 80%. And unit mix, as you can see over here, if you add these two together, it is still about 42%. So quite healthy. I would say it's still quite a family-oriented kind of development. I think this is still quite safe generally in terms of percentage-wise. Maintenance fee on the higher side for the smaller bedrooms, but for the bigger ones, I would say comparatively more worth it. But nowadays, if you look at it, some people say, oh, 400 plus is expensive. But it is what it is. The current era of inflation has really affected us. So I think it is something that we are prepared for. Of course, there are quite some developments that are even more expensive. But this is, I would say, more on the average side already. Side plan over here, like I said, I won't be touching too much. There's a tennis court and then there's a funny shaped pool over here. Not too big of a land plot as I mentioned previously. And then we look at the master plan. What they're selling for Penrith is that, or is the last plot of residential land. I'm just taking this from some of the slides that I've seen. So their angle is that Penrith is some of the last plot of residential land that is nearest to Queenstown MRT over here. And then this is Penrith, right? And then if you go down to Queenstown MRT, this one is just across the road. But the question is it going to be a HDB or a private? I think at this point it's a little bit too early to decide. And over here, we can still see that there are quite some residential colored plots over here. So that's why it's still too early to say whether is it the last plot. But if you're talking about nearest to Queenstown MRT, I think there are quite some plots that are still quite within walkable distance. So it's not too much of a formal effect to be too concerned about. Even then, this field, for now, master plan can always be changed. Remember guys, it's not hard. This is not like cast in stone. It can always be changed in the next master plan. 2.1, generally you can build maybe up to about 24 stories. The supply in the area currently for the 1 km radius is already about 6,000 units. So which is quite a cause for concern, because when it comes to unit number, I think anything above 5,000 is really quite scary. And then now it's really like this. Imagine all these additional supply in the future is going to be affecting. Some of the transacted that we already seen at Penrith's lower side already hitting as low as 2,300 plus that, but that is only one unit over here, which I think obviously they throw it out for advertising purposes. As high as you can see over here, these whole range are all above 3,000. Oh, 3,000 for this area. ASEA. I mean, I get maybe the view is nice, but if you by any chance you're buying this for flipping profits and expecting profits, I'm not saying that they will definitely lose money. In terms of gross, may or may not be, but in terms of net, that could be quite a possibility, at least in the near future, especially for those people who are looking at 4 to 5 years kind of entry investment. So I would say these few people over here, they should be looking at it more like an emotional buy rather than a logical purchase. So hopefully they are not looking at this as an investment. Never mind, let's just look at some of the charts over here for those that we mentioned just now. Competition in the area, I think it's not very accurate for people to be comparing Penrith to those like Sterling residents. Later we will dive into deeper numbers of why I think so. But as you can see in this chart, Sterling residents previously, it was launched below the ongoing developments. Why I say ongoing? Because they are not really fully built at that point. Commonwealth Towers, maybe yes, but you can see that it was cheaper than the rest. But today Penrith is different. Penrith is sitting around here. Of course, you can argue that it's post-harmonization effect and all. Maybe we'll bring it out a notch, but it's still sitting around here. So if you compare, it's more similar to Commonwealth Towers when it was first launched. And if you look at it, yes, they do make money, but the main bulk of it was stuck around here. So for this year, from 2014 to maybe about 2022, almost about 8 years, this was the rough profit margin. It's only the last 2 to 3 years, that's when the profit surged another level because of surrounding developments. I would say it is not a very apple-to-apple comparison in terms of pricing to use Penrith versus Sterling residents. I would say it's more like the early stage of Commonwealth Towers. In fact, Queen's Peak, you see at this point when it was launched nearer towards 2017, 2016, how many, about 2-3 years apart, it was launched at almost the same price. So obviously the one that is newer and transacted at the same price will be in a way more value for money Queen's Peak, because essentially these two are almost the same location. Then later we look at another area where we have almost the same location and very different numbers and outcome as well. So Commonwealth Towers last time, in terms of gap from the other resale, which is the Queens, which is much older, it was already here. So if you are expecting, like I said, Penrith to be sitting at this kind, I would say not really. You have to be really more diligent in terms of the investment objective and also the approach to this. So for those of you who are looking at this, all these lines, you're getting a little bit confused. It's just my way of showing you that, you see, because it's standard to be drawing one line like this, and if you are smart enough, you will know that those people who got out early, who are really very savvy enough, they would have gotten out here and then hop on to some other things. More, maybe if they are good enough, they would have hopped onto this, right? Of course, the highest that was transacted is already around this range, 3,000 plus already, which is more insane. But later we'll revisit this chart again. First of all, we look at the profit margin for Penrith. It is quite insane. Over the recent few developments, I think this is one of the highest profit margin by the developer. So break even is around this PSF. If they transacted around here, which like I said is about maybe above 2,800, so we use about 2,820. That will give us about 39% profit margin. So is this really comparable to Sterling Residence, Commonwealth Towers, Queen's Peak, all these? I think later we'll have a quick look. But if you are expecting that kind of gain that Sterling Residence is getting, we'll come back to this. Sterling Residence, like I said just now, break even 1,600 plus. Average launch at their launch, because now we are comparing launch for launch, So this launch over here is about 1,750 last time back in 2018, which means that profit margin for Sterling Residence is only 8%. Now, if we go back to this 8% versus 39% profit margin, is this really comparable? Is it reasonable for us to expect the same kind of profit performance from the resale buyers next time for Penrith versus Sterling Residence? And then the next one will be Commonwealth Towers. As you can see over here, the profit wasn't as fast as Sterling Residence. So why I think it is starting to show itself? 15% profit margin, 1,414 versus 1,632. And quite coincidentally, Queen's Peak also averaged about 1,632, which is at 16% profit margin, slightly cheaper break-even PSF. So I think deal for deal, this one very likely is going to be better if you look at the numbers. Then go back to Margaret View. This one at that point, I would say out of the four of them, this one would be the most, I would say, overvalued at that point. Break even was about 1,500 plus, and then average transacted was about 1,800 plus, which brings us to the profit margin of 21%. Now, if we look at the four of them put together, these are the break evens. And these are all the top performers of all these four developments in that area, because we look at how the history, because a lot of people, they base on the history of these surrounding developments, and then that's why Penrith definitely, no matter how high we go, they are still going to make money. I think this is, I would say, quite delusional, and it's very dangerous if you are approaching this from an investment point of view. So back to this, all these are average, I already mentioned just now. How all these people make so much money, more than 1 mil, right? Back to this, is that this one, when they bought, profit margin was only about 8%. This one, profit margin even less than 1% from the break-even price, and that's how low they were getting. Over here, for Queen's Peak, this particular unit that was the highest profit margin, when they bought, the PSF was only about 7.8% from the break-even. Commonwealth Towers, this one is only 4.3%. And even those people that managed to somehow make money from Margaret View, which if you compare all these guys are hitting 1 mil, 1 mil, 1 mil. Okay, although there's not many of them. But this guy over here is maybe just slightly more than half for the top performer in the area. But you can see over here, even then, those people that managed to survive and somehow still make quite some money, how much did they get in? Just now, average, we mentioned that it was about 1,880. So all these guys that managed to make money got in at way below the average. And this guy that managed to make the most amount of money he got in just above the break-even price. And that's why if you zoom back into this, if you are looking at, let's say, over here, Sterling Residences, this guy make about 50.9% gain compared to his entry price, right? This one to this one is about 50.9%, and if we look at the same amount of margin, that means you are expecting Penrith to be entering at this price and then exiting at 4,255 PSF in maybe 7 or 8 years. Let's hope, I really hope that the market would have gone up to that level, because it is quite scary to be thinking at 4,000 plus PSF. Back to the same chart again, like just now what we mentioned, for those people who enter at 3,000 plus, they are looking at the developer profit margin of about 52%, which is mad. And then if we go back to the chart as a whole, you can see that 39% for Penrith average, they're sitting around here. So that's why I feel over here it is quite scary to be thinking that Penrith is expecting the same kind of profit margin. In comparison, if we look at the nearby area, which is Redhill MRT, Echelon previously was transacted at an average back in 2013, 1772 PSF. Break-even price was 1260, which leads to a profit margin of 40.6%. Does this actually look very similar to Penrith's 39% as compared to Sterling's 8%? So what happened over here was that because they were launched too high, and compared to the rest like Atra or maybe even Alex Residences, Echelon took a very long time for them to recover. In fact, those people that got in post-launch around here, they were the ones that actually benefited. So how much did they actually manage to make was 10.2% in 13 years, which I feel unfortunate, or maybe in a way, but at least they managed to make money. Better than those people who lost money, like those areas like OUE, Twin Peaks. I think even till now they are still way underwater, so it's not a good thing, I would say. Then if we look at the other side, Whistler Grand previously break even 1,300 plus, transacted also 1,300 plus for average, or rather median median, so this one will be even better. So median back in 2018 was this. Essentially, developer only made 3.5%. And this, what happened was that at that point the climate wasn't as crazy, as bullish as the current era. Developers are not so optimistic, and that's why they decided to price it a lot more sensibly. And what happens was the buyers were the ones that benefited, obviously, because in 7 years they managed to make almost 43%, which is quite crazy. Because if you look at this from a $2 million point of view, entry price example, let's say entry price $2 million, that means you are looking at $800,000+. There are quite some people that managed to make $700,000-800,000+ for Vista Grand, and at a much lower entry price. The key thing over here is not about the gross profit, it's about the return on investment, because they are using a much lower amount to make a much higher amount. Somewhere in the middle, we look at the Link, because previously a lot of people think that the Link make a lot of money. It is definitely a very profitable development, but is it as profitable as this one location? Definitely hard to beat, because it is totally not within comparison. This one is basically a beauty world, and this one is almost like in the middle of nowhere. But if you look at the profit margin, I would say as an investor, I would gladly look at this one. But even then, this is definitely no slouch. Break even was about 1,800 plus, average around here, which gives us the profit margin of about 17%. Previously, it was 96%, so even then, it was only 17%, like I mentioned. And what happened was, some people managed to make quite decent amount of money. Not exactly super crazy, but I would still say very good amount of money. But those people who managed to make the highest annualized, if you look at it, they still also enter quite a bit substantially below the average launch price. What happened was quite a decent 26% in just about 5 years. Definitely not as impressive as Whistler Grand, but the good thing will be that it is definitely way better than Echelon previously. The other interesting thing that we look at over here is the Skyview versus Sky Habitat. At Bishan, we should know already this is a very iconic condo for Sky Habitat. The other one is quite standard, but still quite a black color building, so quite outstanding. Sky Habitat previously was launched around this price. Okay, over here, as you can see, 21% profit margin. Skyview, 1.4 something, which leads us to only profit margin of 3.9. What happened? Side by side, almost launched just I think maybe about months apart. I'm not even sure whether it is even 1 year, but we look at the chart over here, as you can see, it's maybe almost only 1 year apart. But what kind of performance difference will be that? In 12 years, Skyview managed to make about 58%, which is astounding. Huh? This one, 13 years, only about 70%. So side by side location, as you can see, essentially almost the same location, but very, very different results because of the way the developers price the product. All in all, I think to compare back, is Sterling Residence performance versus Penrith really an apple-to-apple comparison as compared to what most of the other agents says? Or is it not really an apple-to-apple, but more like an apple-to-orange comparison? Of course, if you are buying because you really love the area, you want to stay, you want to enjoy the view, then by all means, I don't think you need this video at all. But if you are looking at this from an investor point of view and expecting that kind of margin, then I will say it is going to be quite difficult. But make sure, as always, do your due diligence. I think in this market, it's very easy to be caught up in all this FOMO kind of drama, but try to avoid getting into those kind, because there are still quite some opportunities out there if you can look sharply and then look objectively at the market. That will be all we have for today, and if you need any help, feel free to DM. See you guys, take care, bye bye.